is a modular housing system that addresses Aotearoa's most pressing issues of climate change and chronic housing crisis by connecting vernacular building techniques with contemporary building practice. I'd like to add that we started proposing a low-carbon alternative for our building supply and re-establish the relationship between agriculture and construction. Shoreline also helps to inspire to understand the connection between the heating and the land.
That was Magda Garbarczyk of the Fine Lines Architecture. We did this on YouTube, where she shares a presentation along with slides so that you can see what she's talking about. You can go to the Common Ground YouTube channel and you can see the images. We did this about 2 years ago, but I still find this topic incredibly relevant, and it's exciting to think about building with waste materials, which is straw or a waste material of the grain growing industry. There's also carbon negative or carbon sequestering building materials, which we definitely need to be doing more of in this age of climate change, and where we can be reducing carbon in our atmosphere or having other building materials that do not create more waste or more carbon. The other thing I really like about it is that it is modular. So this design she'll talk about is with panels. So it makes it easier to build either on-site or off-site and put it together. It makes it more accessible to people. So that's one of her other objectives with this building type, which is to make it more affordable, and that it can be used for communities that want to develop multiple houses. And I really love these values of affordability, sustainability, reusing of waste, and thinking about how it fits into the bigger problems that we have in the world and looking to solve it through a building style. She also brings on her collaborator, Min Hall. Magda is a local to Nelson, near where I'm living. She's a regenerative practitioner, the same as me, which is actually where we first met. Here we go, on to the show. Kia ora, and welcome to the Homefulness Show. I'm your host, Zola Rose, located in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We believe housing can be a means for regenerative placemaking to create affordable and sustainable homes and neighborhoods developed in collaboration with the communities that live there. To unlock this potential, this show aims to empower you in creating great places to live. Come join us as we bring to life the more beautiful housing that we know is possible.
Thank you, Zola, for inviting me to talk about our project. My name is Magda Garbarczyk. I'm mostly known by Magda, and I'm a director at Fine Line Architecture together with my business partner, Matthew Hay. And for this project, we have collaborated with architect and researcher Min Hall, who I invited to join me to talk more about the research she's leading at Unitec School of Architecture and how we have integrated this research into this project. So before we get to the project itself, I think it's worth giving it a little bit of context. When I graduated with my Masters of Architecture in 2008, I worked for a number of years at various international firms in Europe, and then I moved to New Zealand in 2012. I worked for an award-winning firm in Auckland. And then I had a shift in my architecture career, and I switched from working in practice to working in education. And so this shift gave me an opportunity to first reconsider the role of architecture and what I wanted to do with my career. So I was a lecturer and researcher at the School of Architecture for about nearly 10 years, mostly focusing on sustainability and regeneration. This is also where I met Min and had the pleasure to work with her on a few projects. What I want to say about education is that being in academia is a privilege that allowed me to build an informed awareness of the really complicated role of architecture in the context of the climate crisis, but also to better understand the interconnectedness between social, economic, cultural, and environmental perspectives. So when I decided to start my own practice early last year, I was determined to let go of the traditional architecture practice model, which in short really is to build beautiful, expensive houses for the very few who can afford them, and to rethink about what and who we as architects are in service to. Very quickly, a lot of questions started to arise around the idea of how to practice in a way that is responsive to the climate emergency. Some of those questions were how to practice design as an act of advocacy, how to integrate research into practice, and how do we transition towards a practice model that genuinely responds to the multi-layered crisis we face. And so we decided that instead of hopefully waiting for that dream client who would commission us to develop an affordable, low carbon, community-focused and regenerative housing project, we were going to try to initiate it ourselves and see where it leads to. So not long after that, Min and I came across this design competition organized by INDBO and decided to collaborate and bring together those design intentions with Min's research, and in a way, use the competition deadline as a step in this transition journey for our own practice. So INDBO it's a global network dedicated to traditional building architecture and urbanism. And the competition they launched was focused on low carbon, no carbon, and carbon negative house designs informed by the vernacular traditions of a place. So really, we felt that this competition was basically written for us and submitted the scheme we will present to you now. When Maori arrived in Aotearoa almost 1,000 years ago, they brought bio-based building traditions with them. They used timber poles for structure, bundles of raupo, which is bulrush, or woven harakeke for walls and grasses for roofs. They were also the first to grow grain here about 200 years ago. With the arrival of European settlers, new traditions and materials got incorporated. So the use of timber frames predominantly, and eventually glass and iron. Fast forward 200 years, our neighborhoods are made of large standalone houses on concrete slab with steel roofs, framed with treated timber, insulated and clad with mostly imported materials. There are really many issues associated with this way of building and living, but there are two of them that I want to point out today. One is that the carbon footprint of our buildings is unsustainable, as is our reliance on products imported from the other side of the world. And two, the tradition of building skills being passed down from generation to generation has been broken. And this is true for both Maori and Pakeha. And so this is what Strawlines is aiming to bridge. Strawlines is a modular housing system that addresses Aotearoa's most pressing issues of climate change and a chronic housing crisis by connecting vernacular building techniques with contemporary building practice. So its primary building blocks are carbon sequestering timber and straw prefabricated elements that we'll explain in more details because this is exactly what her research is focusing on.
I'm currently living in the North Island, but this kind of scene that you see here is what I've grown up with down in Canterbury. In March every year, you get these great big clouds of smoke, which is straw being burnt after the harvest of the grains. And so it's really that kind of childhood memory has really got me going and researching this particular kind of architecture. So I'll just backtrack. Since 1813, when rangatira Ruatara grew the first crop of wheat in Taitokarau, farmers in Aotearoa have become really good at producing wheat and barley. And they hold world records for it. And for every ton of grain that they produce, there's also a ton of straw. And currently about 30% of that goes up in smoke. So Project Patutu addresses tile, which is achieving environmental sustainability through our relationship with the whenua. And it asks the primary question, how can homegrown materials be used to produce a sustainable prefabricated wall panel system for house building in Aotearoa? This image that you see here is an image that I prepared for a 3-minute spiel competition about my research recently. Straw, like timber, sequesters carbon, which means it has a negative carbon footprint. And the calculations that our research shows is that currently there's enough excess straw that has completely no use at the moment to produce enough highly insulative, low carbon wall panels to build 2,500 houses every year here. This has been really conservative with every figure that we've used to calculate this, and those figures have come from the Foundation for Arable Research, who are like the grain farmers research and professional body. So during the research, which has now been going, this project Patutu has been going since the beginning of 2019, so I'm into my 4th year now. But during that research, we first of all began by looking at various prefab systems overseas. So if any of you know anything about straw bale construction overseas, you might have heard of modular, which is a company in the UK. And then there's EcoCocon, which is based in Lithuania, but they supply timber and straw panels all over Europe. And in fact, have recently been shipping them further afield, like to the US. So we looked at what was out there, and then we looked at what kind of panel designs might suit Aotearoa. And during that process, we made 1/3 scale prototypes of different panel designs. At 1/3 might sound like a weird size, but I discovered that you can go to garden shops and buy these little tiny straw bales that are used for growing strawberries. And they just happen to be exactly 1/3 in every dimension of a typical straw bale that you get off the paddock. So hence 1/3. We have looked at different sized panels, and we've looked at using engineered timber or just straight sawn timber. And what we've ended up with going for is sawn timber. So we're as least processing as possible. And we have looked at panel sizes that are no wider than 1,200 millimeters, which is the standard width for most sheet building products that you can buy from Bunnings or whatever. And we also were very keen that we weren't going to make massive panels. Some of the overseas ones are really enormous. They're like an entire wall of a house in one hit. Because the reason for wanting the small size is that we really wanted this to be suitable for papakainga or other group housing projects, something that you could imagine with a bit of know-how and technology you could set up in a small community. And that is exactly what we did. In 2019, the course that Magda and I were running at that time, Resource Matters, we had a team of 14 students, and we built a small 1/3 scale building for Build NZ, which is the biggest trade show in Aotearoa. And so we went for it for 6 weeks with the students. They were doing other courses at the same time, and we made these 7 panels, and then we ended up building this small house, which we called Straw into Gold. And we got a fantastic buy-in from the students. And I think that for us, this really cemented the idea that communities can build using this kind of simple technology. There's been a bit of a hiatus in this whole project. And what's been happening in the background is we've tried out these different kind of panel designs, and we've arrived at one particular panel. And this is now the Patutu panel. And it's had a full structural analysis on the design of a small house. And then when Magda and I and Matt saw the Intval competition challenge, it was like, hey, let's just really see how far we can push this. And we really only had a couple of weeks, which is something that we really do want to point out. Like everything that you see about this design, it's like the initial concept design. And we're really happy with it, but it certainly needs more work on it. And so this is some images of the process where you get the straw, build the timber frame with the panels, compact that straw into the panels, plastering them, pre-plastering them one side, and then they can have a variety of finishes. We tend to like the idea of using clay plasters on the inside because natural clay plasters are a wonderful moderator of humidity in the internal environments. But then on the outside, we think that probably being confined to a plaster exterior is not really something that's going to work in mainstream construction. And so what we were trying to do was to produce something that could make a big difference, not just the odd house or the odd cluster of houses out in a rural situation. It's actually we're looking for the big change in the construction industry here. So it's a It's a big ask, but that's what we're looking at. What you see here, timber and straw, they are the gold standards of low carbon materials that we have available. And we don't have to invent a new industry for growing straw. We already have a really successful cereal grain growing industry, and this is a waste product. I think I would probably pass it back to Magda about now.
Thanks, Min. I'll add just that Min actually won that 3 minutes research competition, by the way. So we currently have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom homes, and they range between 34 and 45 square meters in footprint and between 42 and 73 square meters as a total area. And so they are really small. We call them small and smart, and they incorporate built-in furniture, mezzanines, and double height spaces to create that feeling of spaciousness. And we also have created efficiency in terms of services by combining all the plumbing into a single wall. So you see there's always this one wall between the bathroom and the kitchen so that all the plumbing can be compacted into this one space, which accelerates construction and diminishes costs. And so those floor plans are really still under development. As Min mentioned, this is a week worth of design. And we imagine that they will be developed together with specific communities and around specific projects. Min touched on that. So the materials used are almost exclusively homegrown or home manufactured, and they act as carbon banks. So the higher embodied carbon materials, such as mostly will be metal and glass, are being offset by those that sequester carbon, such as straw and timber. So imagine the houses to be really customizable, and they can be clad with a variety of materials and finishes in a way that responds to place, to availability around that place, and affordability, of course. And so besides the straw panels, we are proposing a whole off-site elements fabrication, including roof cassettes, floor cassettes, and screw anchor piles instead of using concrete. And so that allows for less ground disturbance during construction. Prefabrication has many advantages, despite sometimes having a bit of a bad rep in New Zealand, but especially at the time when we need to significantly improve the quality of our homes and reduce the construction costs simultaneously, it's actually a really good solution to look again at. And so some of the advantages are waste reduction. That's a really big one. There's a circular potential, shorter construction times, usually less than half of the time compared to traditional building, financial savings, flexibility, reduced site disruption, consistent quality, and also site safety. But having said that, prefabrication makes a lot of sense at large volumes, which is at the very kind of end goal and the big vision is leaded towards. But the straw lines design can also easily be built using conventional on-site construction methods, just like we did on a 1/3 scale together with a group of basically unskilled labor, and us included, slightly unskilled too, with a group of students. So we imagine that you scale that up to the full scale and to a few skilled builders and a community group, it can actually happen as well. So the houses we propose they are small, they are modular, and they are designed with community diversity, intergenerational living in mind. If there's one thing that I learned from my regenerative practice is that we need to think about our designs as being part of a larger system rather than those objects in isolation. And so in following that thought, we really imagined that straw lines would work really well in Papakainga, co-housing, and other community-led housing developments. And that's something that we've been talking about a lot and that we would like to integrate maybe a little bit more in the next iterations of the design.
I'd like to take a brief moment to share with you about Common Ground, the consulting agency to provide professional services to enable more affordable, socially connected, resilient, and climate-adaptive housing and neighborhood development and place-based living. So Common Ground works with local government, with community housing providers, with for-purpose developers, and with groups of people wishing to lead their own housing initiatives. We provide services in housing strategy, design and facilitation of meaningful community engagement, research, policy development, training in new approaches to better housing outcomes, We also provide services in workplace culture and communication to create more cohesive and effective working teams and workplaces. You can visit our website at commonground.net.nz to learn more about our services, and please sign up for our newsletter.
So what now? I think it's important to say that this is a concept phase of our project, and that the floor plans, the details, the materials will keep on evolving as the project progresses. One thing to note, the project has been shortlisted for the second phase of the INBAU international competition, which is great. And so that will be taking place in the coming couple of months. And it will provide us an opportunity to continue working on some aspects of the design. But really, most importantly, we are currently having many conversations with communities, with potential industry partners and research partners, and with the intention to build a few prototypes in the region, so in Te Tau Ihu, in the top of the south. We are seeking various funding and collaboration opportunities, and really we see the evolution of this project as an open source, collaborative, with a long-term vision to influence our mainstream housing supply using less carbon and better, smarter designs. Mayan, did you want to add something to that?
Done pretty well, Magda. Probably we should add that we've been looking for partnerships, and in the last few weeks we've become aware of a couple of small companies further south that are actually on the way to producing prefabricated panels, and a bit of a different design than what we're doing, but we're hoping that we're discussing collaboration with them as well. So it's quite exciting to think that there's a number of people who are really investigating this and investing their time and money into it. Feeling pretty hopeful.
Just a little question in relation to the technical panel. Have you considered the end of life in sustainable design, as well as, I guess, the initial stages of the sustainability factor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your question, Alina. Yeah, so we are developing that aspect, and we actually thinking about designing for deconstruction in a way that when you have those panelized system, you can just take them out and use them for another project. The panels themselves, they are really durable, and in the very worst case, at the very end of life, they will be done in such a way that they can return to the ground without any contamination.
Oh, thank you.
Might be just worth pointing out that in the United States, there's houses over 100 years old with straw bale, and the straw is completely intact. I went to a conference in Colorado in 2012, and there were some bales from a house that had some alterations done to it, and the bales arrived at the conference, and they were pretty coarse and gnarly. You wouldn't pity any animal that wanted to eat it, but it was amazing, completely sound. So if it can be kept dry outside, then it's...
Yeah, because I know sometimes, I guess I've looked at prefabricated panels in the past, things like fixings, how you are able to essentially separate out those materials should you want to see any of those, and recycle, reuse.
Yeah, the idea is to pretty well have most of the fixings screwed together. When you end up doing plasters of any kind, you would automatically have some kind of damage that would happen. But earthen plasters are really quite forgiving as well, so they're completely patchable afterwards.
And the way the panel is built with those earth plasters is that you have 2 layers of earth plasters that are done before off-site, and then you have the last layer that would be done on-site, and we call this one the kind of the sacrificial layer. If you were to deconstruct, that's the layer that will get damaged, but because it's earth, it's actually quite easy to patch if you were to rebuild it again. And Min mentioned, everything would be, the fixings are very important. Yeah, definitely. And also the way that we built our small house, that third scale, it's informed a little bit the way that we're thinking about this bigger scale, this bigger project, because we needed to actually move it a few times. So it went through different exhibitions. And so we had to undo it and redo. And the roof was a bit of a challenge, because the roof was done in one piece, the way that you would actually do it on the construction site. And that was the really complicated piece, because it was really big and heavy. But the panels were the easy bit, yeah. So we took develop that further and thought about a roof cassette and a floor cassette in the same way as we think about the panels.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Actually, a question struck me, Magda, and that's in regard to if you end up with plastering on both sides of these panels, it strikes me that you lose your bracing diaphragm.
No, so it's plastered on one side. Yeah, sorry.
So there was an option mentioned, I think, for plaster on both sides. So is that not the case?
No, it's actually plastered on one side. So the interior is plastered and the exterior has a wrap board, a rigid barrier. And so that's your bracing. We're also investigating different ways, different interior finishes, because we also conscious, like the patu panel that Min has been developing this is what we're talking about right now, but we are open to we are also thinking of a panelized solution. What if the interior was plywood, for example, or any other sheet material? There's some really interesting sheet materials being developed at the moment. I'm just thinking of Safe Board, which is another sheet material done with waste products, Tetra Pak waste. There's many materials that are really interesting, and what we need to research a bit further to be able to use those is the permeability and the vapor transfer and things that Min might be probably better than me to talk about that.
Yeah, the building science of building with straw bale, there's kind of two ways of looking at it. And one is a bit like a passive house system where you try and prevent moisture from getting into the walls full stop. So it requires mechanical ventilation of the house, and it usually requires using Intello building wraps that really slow the water vapor from actually entering the walls from the inside in the first place. So that's one way. And then the way that we're wanting to go is the less high-tech way of having the clay plasters and having them moderate the humidity inside, which means that your walls have to be able to breathe. So when you're looking at the material that's going to be on the outer face and act as the bracing panel, it needs to have a certain level of permeability. And to be quite honest, it's desktop stuff that is happening at the moment. What we really need is to have some buildings in use. But
the prototypes. Yeah, so
yes.
when we talk about those prototypes, we imagine maybe, let's say, 3 slightly different types, slightly different iterations of the panel. So one would be the Patutu panel, maybe another one, like at Fine Line, we are in the process of getting Passive House certified. So we're going through the process of understanding of how to do it properly. It would be great to adapt one of those straw lines as a passive house. And maybe a third one that would be some solution in between with a sheet material. So that again, it will depend on who we collaborate with, who's open to try something, and to what's available, what makes sense for the place and for the community we would work with.
See, one of the things is that in Europe, there are a lot of sheet products available that we no longer have available. So you can buy wood fibre board and hemp fibre board, and those products are breathable. Sadly, in 2008, we produced our last sheet of softboard in Aotearoa, and then the whole Fletcher's plant got decommissioned and the machinery sent off to India. So we no longer make softboard, which is a wonderful product that gives you some insulation as well. But when I was just talking before about there's the theory and then there's what happens on the ground, because one of the prefabricated companies that I've been talking with in Vermont in the US, where they have very cold and wet winters, they actually use plywood as on the external face of the board. When you look at it in terms of the moisture movement, it would seem like on paper that you get some condensation on that plywood because it's only semi-permeable. Or in fact, it's semi-impermeable. But that particular outfit have been building in straw bale for a long time, and they've been using plywood. And even though on paper it doesn't work, they've tested all these. They've tested, I think, 20 houses, and it might get a little bit moist at times, but it dries out straight away. There's a lot to be done if you were going to build with any kind of new material where you would want to have research, ongoing post-occupancy research to find out actually how they are performing.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's
So
a question I see from
the answers.
Yeah, Karen has a question.
Yeah.
Kia ora koutou. This is really exciting, and thank you for doing this presentation. I'm not an expert on building at all. My background is zero waste, so that's the sort of side I'm coming from, but very obviously totally interested in affordable housing because we need plenty of it. Obviously, we all need affordable housing. The one you mentioned, Magda, you mentioned Save Board. I've got real concerns about that product because it's based on, they call it recycling, but it's downcycling Tetra Paks. And I think your product is a beautiful product of natural materials and good materials, whereas Tetra Paks are horrendous material that we shouldn't actually be using in anywhere because they're mixed materials. And you can't, any mixed packaging material cannot be recovered properly. So, that's, I mean, that's just my thoughts. So I just thought I'd pass that on to you.
Yeah, look, the answer is easy. I actually agree with you 100%. I kind of mentioned Save Board because it's a material that people are talking about at the moment as an example of what other materials we could consider, but we would definitely go through an analysis of what material makes sense and what doesn't. And yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good point you're making about the fact that sometimes by using certain materials that come from the waste stream, we are not preventing that waste from happening in the first place. And that's a little bit what might happen with Save Board. It's a really good point. Yeah, thanks, Karen.
And there's a question from Linda.
Kia ora, Julie, actually. Hi, Julie Asma.
Hi, Julie. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering about the eaves. Lack of eaves there in those designs.
Great question. We're talking about this all the time. Yeah, we had the eaves will probably come back in the next iteration. We were looking at how can you build very small houses and a bit closer to each other and creating really interesting spaces. And so we tried to minimize the eaves, and we came up with the design of that kind of cap. So we have that steel cap that kind of descends to protect a little bit more. And you don't see that very well on those renders. That there is a little bit of, there's like a mini eve. But yeah, we were talking about what makes sense for our climate and what makes sense for our changing climate, and the fact that it's been raining so much in Nelson. I moved here, everybody was saying sunny Nelson, but maybe it's not going to happen anymore. So definitely the eaves are going to come back in somehow. Yeah.
Great. We can just have time for, I think, one more question. I actually had one because then I wanted to move us into our networking groups. But I was quite interested to hear that you think this is a good prototype for a collective housing group, a community housing group. What makes you say that?
I think so. The one thing is the modularity of it. It's quite adaptable, and I think it's not just the designs the designs that we're presenting are really just one way of developing the concept. But the concept, and we would really start with the communities that we're working with. We're imagining that the project as a whole is not just the panel, or it's not just one house. The project is actually a collaboration with the community, using those materials that we know how to put together and developing kind of plans together with communities. You're in the process of co-design, really. And so that's why this is how we thought about that project from the very beginning. And of course, there could be standalone little infill houses in someone's backyard, and that would work too. But it's not quite our intention with that project.
Yeah, but just to add a bit to that is that the first sort of prefabbed straw bale and timber project, we stand back to ModCell in the UK, and their theory was that they would build these panels in like a big shed somewhere. Their ideal was within 20 kilometres of the building site, and they use that shed for a while. And so I've always come from the idea of, okay, what about for a papakainga development in a rural community? Everyone has a 3-bay barn, that kind of scenario. And it's just setting up with regular carpentry workshop gear and building the beds to do it. And that community, with some skilled guidance, could perhaps build these panels. And so that's been an idea that's been there all along. And then maybe it's in a straw growing area and maybe this rural community that's lost its factory or whatever that employed people, maybe they could set up and they could be making panels. And I have those kind of visions that started this project.
Part of a system. The project would become part of a system.
Yeah, it's in the hands of the people who will be living in them. It's really a beautiful concept of people becoming empowered in their own housing, not only the design, but the creation of it as well. And that's really great. Thank you.